Hey there, family. Lean in for a second. What if I told you the fiercest revolution you'll ever lead begins with the way you talk to yourself? Stay with me, because in the next heartbeat, a single match is going to test everything we believe about love, dignity, and who we choose to be. When we rise in the morning, before any other voice greets us, we meet our own. That voice is intimate, persistent, and formative. It narrates our worth even before we set a foot on the floor. Think of it as the paintbrush that lays the undercoat on the canvas of our day. If the inner conversation says, "I'm inadequate," the hues of insecurity run underneath every subsequent layer of color, every choice, every interaction. Neuroscientists talk about neuroplasticity, how repeated thoughts carve grooves in the brain, shaping perception and behavior. So when we rehearse compassion toward ourselves, when we say, "I can grow from this," or "I am inherently worthy," we are not simply uttering feel-good phrases, we are rewiring the architecture of our minds. Now consider the inverse, a steady drip of self-criticism. Over time, those acidic words corrode not only self-esteem but empathy toward others. A person scalded by inner contempt often projects that scalding outward, searching for relief by singeing someone else. In the tragic moment when a sacred text was set alight, what we witnessed in public may have begun in private, a silent inner monologue, full of estrangement, full of bitterness, found its expression in an act that scorched more than paper. Yet inner dialogue can also be the womb of healing. I recall interviewing people who survived unthinkable loss, refugees, parents who had buried children, and again they spoke of a turning point, a moment when they changed the way they addressed themselves, not denying pain, but refusing to let pain dictate identity. They told themselves, "I am still here, I can still choose," and that subtle change of script birthed resilience, so luminous it lit the path for others. We teach children to mind their manners when speaking aloud, but we rarely instruct them to mind their inner manners. Imagine classrooms where meditation is as valued as math drills, where students learn to meet anxiety with truthful yet gentle self-talk. Imagine boardrooms where leaders begin meetings by anchoring in a question: what story am I telling myself right now, and is it serving the collective good? When I moderated town halls after moments of national fracture, I noticed that communities unable to name their internal narratives could not move toward reconciliation. They remained tethered to unseen scripts of blame, scarcity, or superiority. Meanwhile, the communities that dared to examine their inner speech found room for new possibilities. They practiced speaking to themselves with humility and clarity, and that practice translated into policies rooted in dignity. Your private words are rehearsal for public impact. They are seeds that sprout in behavior, in choices, in the tone you send into the room like invisible fragrance. Speak condemnation within, and sooner or later condemnation leaks out. Speak compassion within, and compassion becomes a contagion for which the world desperately hopes. So the next time you catch yourself wielding harshness against your own heart, pause, ask, would I say this to a child I love? If not, edit the sentence, because we are all children of something sacred, deserving of languages that lift rather than lash. The power of inner dialogue is the first arena of social justice, the origin of every hand that harms or helps, a moment of profound disrespect, the unexpected aftermath, choosing compassion over contempt, universal accountability. There are singular instances in history when a match is struck, a flash ignites, and in that flicker the conscience of a community is tested. The public burning of the Koran was such an instant, a visceral breach that radiated far beyond the flame itself. Picture the scene: an ordinary plaza on an otherwise forgettable afternoon, pedestrians moving with the casual rhythm of daily errands, until the air thickened with the acrid scent of smoldering paper, and something far more combustible, the collective sense of shared humanity. Sacred scripture, for believers, is more than ink and pages. It is a vessel of the divine, a living bridge between mortal frailty and transcendent purpose. To set it alight, is to declare open hostility, not only toward a text, but toward millions for whom that text is an intimate companion at dawn, prayers, at bedside whispers, at moments of grief and gratitude. The smoke that curled upward carried with it generations of memory, devotion and identity, reduced to ash before astonished eyes. Yet if we probe beneath the surface of the act, we unearth layers of motive and misapprehension. Disrespect rarely erupts in isolation, it germinates in the soil of ignorance, watered by fear, fertilized by echo chambers that reward outrage. Somewhere long before the flame, seeds were sown, stories told around dinner tables, headlines skimmed but not questioned, caricatures repeated until they calcified into conviction. The burner, whoever they may be, did not wake up that morning with a spontaneous urge to violate a holy artifact. Rather, a narrative had been rehearsed, one in which the other was reduced to an abstraction, a faceless symbol onto which frustrations could be projected. When humanity is deleted from the equation, the threshold for desecration lowers drastically, and the unimaginable begins to feel permissible. Witnesses describe a hush that fell over the plaza, the peculiar stillness that sometimes precedes collective emotion. For some, the moment landed like a direct blow, grief mixed with disbelief, tears stinging eyes even before the soot could. For others, outrage rose quickly, a visceral defense mechanism kicking in, pulses sprinting, fists clenching. There were also those who found themselves stunned into moral paralysis, aware that history was tipping in front of them, but uncertain how to lean it back toward justice. Cameras came out, clicks and flashes punctuating the silence, because in modern life, documenting atrocity is often the first attempt at agency. Social feeds began to populate with images of flames licking at verses, hashtags forming a digital battleground where condemnation and complicity wrestled for narrative supremacy. In that very instant, the plaza became a classroom teaching an unplanned lesson on the anatomy of disrespect. Disrespect fractures the social contract, because it signals that certain boundaries of dignity can be breached with impunity. It is a declaration that one story, one worldview claims supremacy over another. But here's the paradox: while the act was meant to diminish, it inadvertently magnified the sanctity of the Koran in the eyes of onlookers, who might never have given it a second thought. Curiosity bloomed alongside indignation. People unfamiliar with its pages began to ask, what is in this book that elicits both devotion and derision? Librarians reported upticks in requests for English translations. Bookstores saw shelves momentarily emptied not by flames, but by hands eager to investigate. Thus, the moment of disrespect also sparked a surge of engagement, a countercurrent of interest that no proselytizing campaign could have engineered as swiftly. Consider, too, the ripple across faith traditions. Leaders from churches, synagogues, temples and gurdwaras issued joint statements, standing shoulder to shoulder in defense of mutual reverence. Such solidarity did not erase theological differences, but it illuminated a shared understanding that the degradation of any sacred emblem jeopardizes the peace of all. When a single thread of the tapestry is scorched, the integrity of the entire weave is threatened. Interfaith vigils were organized, not merely as gestures of tolerance, but as proclamations of intimate concern. Your anguish is my anguish, your text's wounds graze my own sense of sanctity. Teenagers who had grown weary of sermons found themselves volunteering to hand out roses with verses of kindness attached, discovering activism through tenderness rather than slogans. Meanwhile, psychological aftershocks rippled through Muslim families. Children asked parents why someone would hate their book, their prophet, their prayers. Parents struggled to distill centuries of geopolitics and prejudice into age-appropriate explanations, while fighting the tremor of fear in their own chests. And yet many of those conversations ended up forging steel-strong identity. Children, hearing their parents recite passages about mercy, justice and steadfastness, realized that their faith's core was unscathed by external fire. The flames, paradoxically, served as a forge, tempering conviction rather than melting it away. Law enforcement, drawn into the fray, faced the labyrinthine task of balancing free expression with public order. Legal scholars flooded op-ed pages debating whether the act, though moral anathema, should be criminally punishable. Some argued that legislating respect risks weaponizing the law. Others contended that certain provocations are indistinguishable from incitement. The plaza thereby became not only a moral theater, but a constitutional testing ground, forcing society to interrogate its own boundaries of liberty. Across television studios, pundits dissected motives and consequences, but the subtler narrative unfolded away from studio lights, in coffee shops, where strangers debriefed over lattes, in quiet subway rides, where commuters scrolled through footage with furrowed brows, questioning the trajectory of collective empathy. That shared processing is itself a civic asset, an informal referendum on our readiness to defend each other's dignity, because every moment of profound disrespect is also a mirror, reflecting back the gaps in our education, the fault lines in our compassion, the urgency of expanding our moral circle. The burning of the Koran thrust those reflections upon us with searing clarity, demanding that we respond not just with statements, but with sustained transformative attention to the stories we teach, the fears we nurse, the bridges we choose to build or burn. In the hours that trailed that searing flare of disrespect, the universe seemed to draft its own script, one untelegraphed, unscripted, yet impeccably timed, as though some unseen director cued events to reveal dimensions of humanity we too rarely witness. Rain arrived first, not the gentle romantic drizzle that poets celebrate, but a sudden pelting torrent that swept across the plaza with a startling insistence. People who had clustered in tense semicircles felt the chill sting their faces, and umbrellas popped open in jittery choreography. What began as inconvenience became, moment by moment, a cleansing ritual. The downpour soaked the charred remnants of the Koran, turning ashes into a gray paste that streaked the pavement like mascara after a sob. There was something biblical in the scene, an echo of deluge stories told in every culture, water washing over transgression, preparing the ground for renewal. Yet water alone does not transform hearts. Human gestures must complete the alchemy. A barista from the cafe across the street stepped out with a tray of paper cups, steam spiraling upward in defiance of the chill. She offered hot chocolate to anyone shivering nearby, not pausing to inquire about creed or stance. A Yemeni father of 3, still trembling from the sight of his scripture aflame, accepted the cup with both hands, and in that exchange their eyes met, not Muslim to non-Muslim, not victim to bystander, but soul to soul. Dominoes of generosity toppled after that. Someone produced an extra raincoat and draped it over a protesting student whose sign now bled ink. A retired librarian fetched a stack of plastic ponchos from her car, vestiges of a long-ago camping trip, and passed them out like party favors. Raindrops hammered on plastic hoods, yet beneath the slick exterior new warmth took hold. Journalists, drawn by the earlier blaze, kept their cameras rolling, but the narrative had pivoted beneath their lenses. Instead of capturing incendiary spectacle, their footage now documented micro-acts of solidarity, a teenage girl holding her grandmother's Koran beneath her jacket, shielding it with the kind of reverence reserved for newborns, a tattooed biker adjusting the hijab of a stranger that had come loose in the wind, a priest offering the shelter of his cassock's broad shoulders to an imam whose kameez clung coldly to his ribs. These images ricocheted through social media, refocusing the digital conversation. Comment threads that had been aflame with vitriol softened into threads of awe. Look at them caring for one another. Look how quickly light can follow darkness. For a rare stretch of hours, algorithms that usually feast on outrage were forced to serve a diet of grace. Meanwhile, in living rooms miles away, phones buzzed with group chat notifications. Friends who seldom discussed faith found themselves reckoning aloud. How do we ensure our freedom doesn't mutate into license to wound? Parents paused Netflix queues to field their children's questions. Why did people help after something so awful? those parental answers, improvised yet sincere, seeded lessons that no textbook could rival, that human decency is not a relic, but a renewable resource activated in crisis. Teachers the next day would harvest those conversations, translating them into civics projects and comparative religion assignments. Trauma, rerouted through reflection, became curriculum. Back at the plaza, civic officials arrived under flashing lights, prepared for crowd control, but discovered a congregation rather than a confrontation. They consulted quickly and repurposed barricades into makeshift donation stations. Volunteers deposited blankets, Koran replacements, and interfaith literature. Someone brought a boombox, queued up Mahalia Jackson's Trouble of the World, and soon voices swelled, some trembling, some pitch-perfect, all earnest, into an impromptu choir that looped gospel into the rain-drenched air. A Muslim elder joined, layering Arabic supplication over the melody, and for a slippery second time itself felt braided, ancient lament threading through contemporary gospel, weaving an auditory tapestry that made gooseflesh rise on anyone within earshot. Economists might call what followed a positive externality, sociologists might dub it spontaneous social capital, but those labels feel brittle beside the lived experience of neighbors discovering neighborliness anew. In the week that followed, donations to the city's interfaith homeless shelter tripled. Blood banks reported an uptick in walk-in donors, citing the plaza incident as their catalyst. The local bookstore set up a sacred texts window display, Torah, Bhagavad Gita, Dhammapada, Bible, Guru Granth Sahib, and Koran side by side, and shoppers stood in quiet contemplation as if before a stained glass mosaic. Dialogue circles sprouted, some convened by clergy, others by college freshmen armed with nothing but folding chairs and audacity. Voices that had once surfed only their own echo streams now met in real time, face to face, and discovered that disagreement need not preclude dignity. Perhaps the most tender ripple bloomed within the man whose storefront abutted the plaza, a florist known for cheeky window slogans and rainbow-bright bouquets. He had lost his husband 3 years prior, and had since grown accustomed to measured solitude. When the rain drove people beneath his awning, he witnessed the spontaneous coalition of drenched bodies, and found his heart stirring from dormancy. The next morning he crafted a massive arrangement, white lilies for mourning, sunflowers for resilience, olive branches for peace. He placed it at the blackened spot where the sacred pages had burned, a silent pledge that beauty would contest the scar. Passers-by added their own tokens, origami cranes, handwritten prayers, silk ribbons embroidered with verses of hope, until the arrangement evolved into a living mosaic of communal resolve. Throughout these unfolding scenes, a subtle but profound recalibration took place. The plaza, once an emblem of desecration, morphed into a pilgrimage site for those seeking proof that compassion can rise phoenix-like from the charred nest of hatred. The scent of singed paper gradually yielded to petrichor and floral notes, as though nature and neighbor conspired to rewrite the olfactory memory of that space. Local officials, attuned to the shift, commissioned a mural to capture the metamorphosis, a sweeping tableau of interlocked hands cradling a book radiant with unburnable light, water cascading around it in protective arcs. Children from every neighborhood painted the background, their brushstrokes messy but fervent, embedding their own narrative of resilience onto city walls. In sum, the aftermath confounded the conventional script of violence begetting violence. Instead, violence begot vigilance, indignity begot ingenuity, flames birthed fountains of empathy. Where cynics expected retaliatory combustion, the community discovered an unanticipated chemistry that suffering, when met with intentional solidarity, can catalyze collective elevation rather than descent. Compassion is often mistaken for softness, as though it floats above the jagged realities of conflict like a pastel balloon. Yet true compassion is a tensile strength, forged in the furnace where outrage meets restraint, and emerges as resolute, deliberate mercy. In the wake of the Koran burning, countless witnesses felt the initial surge of contempt, an instinctive recoiling that demanded an eye for an eye, a humiliation for a humiliation. Contempt beckons with the thrill of moral superiority. It whispers that vengeance is justice accelerated. But history's ledger shows that contempt, once indulged, compounds like high-interest debt, extracting payment from future generations who inherit grievances they never incurred. Consider the mother who pulled her teenage son away from the crowd as shouts escalated. His fists were balled, knuckles whitening, fury drumming in adolescent arteries. She knelt so their eyes aligned and said, "Your anger is righteous, but let's decide what we'll build with it." That sentence rewired the circuitry of the moment. Anger was acknowledged, validated, yet steered toward construction rather than collapse. They walked together to a nearby community center, where volunteers were organizing an interfaith supply drive. The boy spent the next hours stacking canned goods, discovering that lifting boxes calmed the same muscles that had yearned to throw punches. His anger did not evaporate. It was metabolized into service, proof that compassion is not the absence of heat, but its redirection. Neuroscientists have charted how compassionate action activates the brain's reward pathways, flooding the body with oxytocin and dopamine in ways that pure schadenfreude never sustains. Acts of contempt light up the amygdala, priming us for fight or flight, but leave behind cortisol residue that degrades both mood and immune function. In practical terms, compassion is biochemical self-respect. When faith leaders gathered days after the burning to wash the plaza with rose water, skeptics scoffed at what they deemed performative symbolism, yet participants reported lowered blood pressure, steadier breathing, and a lingering sense of groundedness. The ritual soothed not just sentiment but physiology, demonstrating that compassion is measurable in pulses and pulmonary rhythms. On the geopolitical stage, choosing compassion might translate into policy reforms, hate crime legislation with restorative justice provisions, educational grants for cross-cultural curricula, city budgets that fund dialogue forums as readily as security apparatuses. Critics argue such measures are naive, but evidence from conflict resolution zones, from South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission to Rwanda's Gacaca courts, reveals that societies investing in structured empathy rebound faster economically and psychologically than those mired in retributive cycles. Compassion, scaled to governance, is neither charity nor capitulation. It is strategic stabilization. At the micro level, compassion manifests in mundane yet radical acts. The bookstore clerk, who recommends a translation of the Quran to a curious customer without presuming defensiveness, the school teacher who turns the incident into a lesson on sacred literatures, inviting Muslim parents to share recitations so classmates hear the cadences of Arabic devotion, the social media influencer who declines to retweet inflammatory footage, opting instead to spotlight organizations combating religious bigotry. Each gesture may appear negligible, but together they form a cultural immune system, producing antibodies against future outbreaks of contempt. There is also an inner dimension, the private theater where self-talk scripts our public posture. Contempt toward others often mirrors contempt toward the self. We project unresolved shame onto convenient scapegoats. In workshops following the Plaza incident, therapists guided participants through exercises of self-compassion, breathing techniques, affirmations, journaling prompts on the premise that a person who knows how to soothe their own wounds is less inclined to slash at another's. One participant, a grandfather whose military background had taught him to equate softness with weakness, broke down while writing a letter to his younger self. He emerged from the session visibly unburdened, later confessing that he finally understood why his reactions to perceived disrespect had always been disproportionate. Healing inwardly recalibrated his outward lens, allowing curiosity to replace suspicion when engaging with people of different faiths. Compassion's power lies partly in its unpredictability. It interrupts the expected plotline of aggression breeding aggression. When the florist delivered that monumental bouquet to the scorch-marked pavement, he could not have foreseen that a local rock band would post a photo of it, sparking a viral hash bloom up against a challenge that inspired thousands to leave flowers at sites of past hate crimes worldwide. Each bouquet became a data point in a map of communal tenderness, proof that compassion can propagate faster than contempt when given a catalyst. Accountability is often framed as a ledger kept by courts or councils, as though responsibility exists only in the realm of visible verdicts. Yet there is a wider tribunal, call it the moral ecosystem, in which every thought, word and deed circulates, gathers momentum and eventually loops back to its point of origin. The night the Quran was burned, many observers assumed the story would narrow to a single perpetrator and a finite retribution, but what unfolded instead was a community-wide realization that cause and effect operate on a collective plane. When anyone acts with cruelty, the injury does not travel in a straight line, it fans out like ripples on a pond, disturbing surfaces far beyond the initial splash, and when kindness is chosen, its benefits disperse just as far, fertilizing fields we may never personally walk. In the days following the incident, a local news outlet published a series titled After the Fire, chronicling unexpected beneficiaries and casualties of that moment. A halal grocery owner reported a decline in foot traffic, not because customers endorsed the burning, but because the tension in the air made casual errands feel fraught. A Jewish synagogue 2 streets over fielded hateful voicemails from anonymous callers emboldened by the spectacle, illustrating how bigotry rarely confines itself to a single target. Conversely, a young atheist volunteer who joined the cleanup, discovered a passion for conflict mediation, pivoted his college major to social work, and is now apprenticing at the city's Department of Human Rights. Each narrative thread affirmed a central law of accountability: consequences multiply in directions we cannot fully predict, binding us in an invisible lattice of mutual influence. Philosophers from every tradition articulate this principle. The Hindu doctrine of karma, the biblical admonition that we reap what we sow, the African concept of Ubuntu, all declare that individual actions are inseparable from communal well-being. Neuroscience offers its own testimony through mirror neurons, those microscopic ambassadors of empathy that fire in our brains when we witness another's joy or pain. On a biological level, we are wired to participate in each other's outcomes. The plaza burning, and the chain reaction it triggered, made that wiring visible in real time. Viewers who watched the viral footage experienced elevated heart rates and spikes of cortisol. Those same viewers, when later shown images of the rain-soaked crowd comforting one another, produced oxytocin that calmed the nervous system. The body itself keeps score of our shared moral economy. Policy makers, pressed by constituents, convened a town hall series called The Commons We Share. Attendance swelled beyond expectations. Business owners, clergy, undocumented workers, high school debate teams, all eager to voice how the event had touched their slice of life. Some demanded stricter hate speech ordinances, others cautioned against curbing civil liberties. What united them was the acknowledgement that no one could afford complacency. A cafe owner quoted Dr. King's letter from Birmingham: "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," and the room nodded, not as an academic exercise but as lived confirmation. Universal accountability, they agreed, is not a metaphysical abstraction, it is a civic strategy. When society permits contempt to go unchecked, the eventual costs are paid in increased security budgets, polarized elections, frayed neighborly trust. Education leaders translated that insight into curricula. Middle schoolers now engage in impact mapping, tracing how a single act, positive or negative, branches outward across social, environmental, and digital spheres. One 8th grade class charted the Quran incident on poster paper: the initial flame at the center, then rings of effect, the trauma, the solidarity, the policy debates, the hashtag movements, the spike in book sales, the interfaith potlucks. Standing before their diagram, a student remarked, "We're all authors of each other's biographies." The phrase traveled through faculty lounges, eventually quoted by the mayor in a speech announcing a new Office of Community Resilience tasked with monitoring and mediating hate incidents. Spiritual guides emphasize that accountability also extends forward in time. The choices we imprint today set trajectories for children not yet born. One imam addressed his congregation, "We inherited a scripture that endured centuries of empires, migrations and censorship. Its survival proves that sacred truths outlast the fires of contempt. Our assignment is to decide what future generations will inherit from us, fear or fortitude." Congregants formed mentorship circles for at-risk youth, pairing them with elders who could model resilience. Within months, juvenile vandalism rates in the district dropped, suggesting that proactive stewardship of the moral ecosystem yields measurable dividends. Technology platforms entered the conversation, prompted by user petitions to refine algorithms that inadvertently amplify incendiary content. Engineers hosted webinars with ethicists, exploring how to encode the principle of universal accountability into recommendation systems. While code alone cannot legislate virtue, transparency dashboards and friction prompts, small pauses before a user can share graphic footage, created space for reflection. Early analytics indicated a modest but notable decrease in impulsive retweets of hateful material, revealing how design choices can reinforce or undermine shared responsibility. Artists too took up the mantle. A choreographer debuted a piece titled "Reverberations," dancers moving in expanding concentric formations, each gesture triggering a ripple through the ensemble. Audiences left the theater viscerally aware that even the subtlest motion carries forward, shaping what happens next on the stage of common life. Poets penned verses comparing accountability to wind unseen but felt, shaping landscapes over time. Galleries displayed photographs of the plaza transformed by flowers, reminding viewers that accountability is not exclusively punitive, it is equally the recognition of our power to repair. The narrative arc that followed the burning therefore resisted neat closure. Courts may yet deliver a sentence to the individual who struck the match, but the broader reckoning unfolds daily in choices both monumental and minute. A city budgeting for dialogue facilitators, a teenager deciding whether to intervene in a bullying incident, a social media user hovering over the share button, reconsidering the echo they are about to create. Universal accountability means that none of us are merely spectators to the world's moral dramas. We are co-screenwriters, composing the lines that will boomerang back into our own lives, our communities, our generations. When the fire met the page, the story could have ended in ashes, but we chose another chapter. We learned that the voice inside us drafts every act that follows, that a single spark of disrespect can awaken a storm of solidarity, that compassion is a muscle strengthened in the very moments contempt thinks it has won, and that the ledger of accountability is written in all our names. So here we stand, you and I, inheritors of both the wound and the wisdom. The question is not whether there will be more matches struck in anger. History promises there will be. The question is, what rain will we summon from our better angels? What bridges will we build before the smoke clears? What legacy of courage, curiosity, and radical care will we stamp upon the future? Our answer begins now. In the quiet sentence each of us whispers to the person in the mirror, "Let me be the light after the fire, the rain after the flame, the voice that turns pain into possibility."